This is Paul Nobles from Eat to Perform. I am here with April Blackford, she of many phone calls today. April, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
So, yeah, we've had all kind of technology issues, and April and I have been on the phone all day long. So we're just going to hop right in. We have a very big class tonight. And Leone is going to start the questions. What is an acceptable amount of carbs to have at lunch? I try to have most of them at dinner and around my workouts early a.m., but I've been really craving carbs in the early afternoon and having a snack on dates and other things to keep the cravings at bay. I know the answer for me is 30 to 50 grams, depending on how I feel. But any thoughts on that, April? Because in general, I think that a lot of people think that control days are supposed to be zero carb, and that's not the way that we intend it, and that's not really helpful, to be completely honest. So what are your thoughts, and what kind of flexibility do you think people should have?
I'm actually the same as you. I usually have to have some level of carbs in most of my meals. 30, 40 grams for me. I'm a female, so a little bit less. I generally recommend, 30 grams of carbs using complex sources or fruits are fine. Obviously, you wouldn't want a high glycemic carb to cause an insulin, crash where you get real tired and sleepy. But it can help sustain energy levels and can help maintain satiety, until your next meal.
I would say that I just want to make sure that my phone is off. But I would say that 30 grams is actually about where I land. The one snack that I've been going to a little bit more lately is Air Pop popcorn. Just filling, does the job, soaks everything up. I really kind of think that's what it is a little bit, that it provides kind of a little layer in your stomach, and it allows for a little bit better digestion. But yeah, I'm kind of with you, Leone. I need a little something. Even after I posted the steak salad that I had, I just had to have 10 gummy bears, just something, just a little sweet afterwards. And there you go. So David's saying, it's okay to go a little higher on macros than what the spreadsheet says I should when I start ETP, right? It's okay to go a little higher on macros than what the spreadsheet says I should when I start ETP, right? I would say that it's okay for sure. The goal is to try and be a little bit more prepared, but I don't know why you would personally. I can tell you that I don't count all that often, but when I do count, it's pretty easy to hit those numbers. Now, one thing I will say, and I was talking to Gina Patterson about this today, that this idea that you have to hit your macros specifically, that's not something that I'm crazy about, because I think that what David's referring to is sort of the problem that people run into. I would much rather see people focus on their calorie points, and then just be in the range. So for instance, if you're supposed to be at 250 grams of carbs and you only get to 235, and you're supposed to be at 60 grams of fats and you get to 63, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal either way. Any thoughts on that, April?
I absolutely agree. That is what I always recommend, is to kind of hang out within your caloric ranges, but you're never going to get your macros spot on. Make protein a priority and get as close as possible. If you're a little bit, generally sometimes on rest days, some people do better with averaging a little lower on their fats and allowing more carbs and still staying within the caloric ranges, and vice versa. I think David was referencing the reverse dieting spreadsheet, and that is generally recommended if you are coming from a much lower calorie standpoint. So if you weren't that low on calories, you certainly can start out higher than what is recommended.
Well, and then the other thing that can be factored in there is how good of an athlete you are. And so if you're kind of sedentary, it might take you a while to get up to those calories. But if you're a pretty good athlete, a lot of times you'll see, I mean, like if you're sedentary, as an example, new to training, might take you 10 to 12 weeks. Okay. If you're well established as a trainer, or a trainee in the gym, and you start to have carbohydrate, you were eating 1,600 calories, and you're supposed to be moving to 2,400, or in the case of David, maybe 2,200 to 2,900. You might be able to get there in 4 to 5 weeks. So it just sort of depends, keeping an eye on the scale along the way just to make sure, just as a level of accountability. That's what I think is sort of important there. I know people always get bugged out. Oh my goodness, he said use the scale. Sort of depends on what your relationship is with the scale, but you'll often hear people go, I don't check the scale, and then they'll check the scale like 2 months later, and they're like, I'm up 8 pounds. Like, well, what the hell did you think would happen if you didn't check the scale and you just ate?
The big thing that I see is very common is people don't check the scale, but then they decide to randomly check it the day after like a horrible weekend.
Oh God, yeah.
That's the one random time that they decide to check it. And of course I'll ask, have you been weighing frequently? No. And I'm like, well, why the hell did you check it on Monday after you ate off plan Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
Because they wanted to have that feeling like they could go ahead and just, have a Mother's Day meal and then get away with it. And the reality is that, there's no free lunches, right? I mean, hey, look, if you had pancakes, you're going to be a little bloated. You probably have a little, day or two where you kind of, flush things out. I mean, I don't even sweat that, at this point.
Well, just as an example, yesterday my family made me 4 gigantic gluten-free waffles, and I ate like 8 pieces of bacon, 3 eggs, and then I ate ribeye for dinner with potatoes. And what did I do today? I went and did deadlifts.
Right, exactly. And oh, by the way, if you're a mom and you don't eat that meal, like, you're a horrible mom. No, I mean, that's what this is all about. This is about using food in a healthy way, and then having that propel you to really energetic feats. And I know that for myself and my wife, on Mother's Day, we actually celebrated on Saturday. I posted the burpee video, and we went on various walks, and then on Sunday, we did a pretty aggressive WOD, which Vicky kicked my ass, just so you know, April. But it was really fun, and what was interesting about it was that it gave me a little time to reflect, because both my mother and grandmother really died of obesity-related illnesses, and so for me to, one thing that I don't even know that I've ever said before, was when my mother passed away, I asked the owner of CrossFit New Orleans, Jeff German, who I had a little bit of a relationship online, if I could do a seminar that weekend, just to honor the memory of my mother, and how, my mother and grandmother struggled with, that type of stuff. I remember my grandmother much more than my mom. My grandmother, ate very little amount of food, was overweight, and really didn't do very much. And, wonderful person. I wouldn't be who I am without it. And I'm pretty sure she'd be proud of what we've been able to do, because she struggled big time, and she always wanted to lose fat and never could figure it out. And if you saw the picture of my grandmother that I posted, she was sort of meant to be, athletic. She was meant to lift weights, and just, the culture wasn't there at that time. And, so so I honor their memories by doing that and being healthy. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think a lot of people focus on their mothers, right? And so like on Mother's Day, you're often thinking to yourself, oh gosh, I got to call my mom. And then when your mother, has passed away, you wish you could call her, So it's kind of an interesting contrast. So Allie's saying, I'm coming from paleo, struggling and get enough protein and carbs on training days. Do you have any suggestions? Female trying to get 275 grams of carbs and 140 grams of protein. I would say that, from paleo sources, 270 grams of carbs is gonna be really hard work. Some strategic additions that would make some sense would probably be, firstly, more fruit. Secondly, potatoes, rice if you're open to it. Most paleo 2.0 people have agreed that white rice is a good option there. I'm just trying to think, April, any other things? Potatoes and rice, right?
Rice hands down is going to be the biggest bang for your buck. Plantains actually are extremely calorie dense, so you can get a high level of carbs without not a lot of food. So I personally find, I love plantains, but I personally find when I eat a large quantity of them, I get extremely backed up. So I would say white rice is kind of the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, in Puerto Rico, they're big into plantains and they're big into mofongo, which is like a mashed potatoes with plantains. Man, you do 2-3 days of those and you're in for some trouble. But yeah, you kind of want those to be a little riper to get, a little bit more carbs from them. But that would be basically some of the options that you would be looking at there. So Kim is asking, is he talking about the reverse dieting spreadsheet you get when you start? Yes, that's what he was talking about, and we kind of figured that out. Let's see. So Andy's saying, I have a question regarding BMR calculations. Are we supposed to estimate the lean body mass of an individual? I'm just curious of BMR calculation made with a body composition analyzer versus not using such a machine. Okay, he has a follow-up. Let's see, more specifically, how to estimate for calculating protein macros off of lean body mass. Well, I think that's sort of hard to do, right? Without a body fat analysis, you can use various things on the internet, but I haven't found anything that really works well. If you have a body fat scale, you can kind of estimate. You can also look at the person and kind of make some estimations there. But in general, if a person, male, kind of lean, probably 20%, a little bigger, 30%, female, kind of the same range, more athletic, 20%, 30% would be, kind of more average. And then, the funny thing about 40%, man, I can't tell you how many women I've seen at 40% that you would never in a million years think of 40%. And usually that comes down to
not enough muscle.
Not enough muscle. Yeah. I'm actually researching 2 articles right now. One that's kind of fun, which is I think Elizabeth Darsh is going to probably do. It's kind of the history of Reebok's relationship, with fitness. So that's kind of interesting, just in that, Spartan race, CrossFit kind of stuff. But then the other one that I'm going to probably be writing is muscle immortality, and just trying to connect the dots on, how much longer you live when you maintain your muscle. Certainly, whenever you have more muscle and you get injured, or something of that nature, your recovery is going to be a little bit better. And so, you know, my mother-in-law used to actually say this all the time, and I wasn't fit at that time, and so it didn't resonate with me the same way it does now. But she would say, like, the minute that you start to see, you know, aging people, you know, start to get thinner, that's it. That's the time. You know, it's going bad. So, not to be such a downer. So yeah, I don't know like what he's saying. I don't know really. I mean,
I think I think he's basically comparing the basal metabolic rate to trying to guesstimate his lean body mass for protein. I agree with you. There's really no accurate way to you know, to if you're trying to set your protein at your lean body mass, if you don't have an accurate body fat test, it's hard to guesstimate that. You know, my suggestion is you know, compare pictures online. If you look close to 30%, then you know, eat, you know.
let's just ask him, Andy, are you doing it for a client or are you doing it for you? And if it's for you, then how much do you weigh? There you go. Let's answer. Let's figure that out. Okay. I was expecting an answer a little quicker. Tracy, let's see. Okay, for myself, I weigh 193 pounds. I mean, if you weigh 193 pounds, what I would do is just multiply times 0.8 and you should be good. You know, that'll get you in a range where you almost certainly are going to be fine with protein. So I hope that helps, because without body fat testing, you're going to always be guessing a little bit. Tracy's saying, been doing ETP for about a month. Whoa, the energy and incredible positives I'm feeling and gains I'm making are awesome. I'm just wondering, when do I know when to add macros? Are there signs that our body tells us that says, hey, you need more? For example, you're hungry to feel lower. I'm curious because I have good energy and have been really hungry before workouts. Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a good sign that you probably should up your calories at that point. If you're hungry before workouts, it's, you know, it's a sign that your metabolism is kind of rolling there. And so you know, we're going to be getting into this a little bit more when the Wave Method book comes out in the next couple of weeks. But really, the goal is to try and expand this, you know, as much as you can, while getting a good result and seeing results that you want to see. And it sounds like that is what's happening for you. So if I was you, you know, I would try to have a little bit more carbohydrate. It is interesting lately, you know, yesterday as an example, you know, there's been a few things that have happened lately, and let me just double check. Okay. There's been a few things that have happened lately that's sort of interesting, and I can kind of talk about that a little bit once we get through some of the questions. But just remind me that I was going to talk about how my body fat has changed recently, and then how various things that I'm doing are affecting that positively. And so once we get through some questions, we can deal with that, and then hopefully we get to it. If we don't, then not that big of a deal. So let's see. So I think that answers Tracy's question, but I think, you know, really push the carbs there as much as possible. And that's what a little bit of what kind of got me on the thought process, because, you know, like yesterday as an example, we did like a 22-minute CrossFit workout, and you know, I really bumped my carbs up that day, and you know, even more than normal, and probably 100 grams more than normal, and the result was super, super positive. Lowest body fat I've been in a while. I have a body fat machine in my house, so so that allows me to sort of check things out. So yeah, I would say I would very much encourage you to continuously push that, because you'll see the best results doing that. So Julia's saying, Is it okay to use protein powders to get in a good amount of daily protein? I just started ETP a couple days ago, coming from Paleo Zone, and struggling a bit to hit my 170 grams from whole foods alone. Unfortunately, grams of fat seems to be up faster than protein and carbs. Julia, do you mind if I ask you how much you weigh? Because one thing that I often suggest to people is to go with zero point 0.8. And so if we're going with zero point 0.8 for you, that would be really more in the 155 to 160 range. But certainly protein powders would be good there. In fact, you probably are trying to get more protein than I'm getting on a daily basis. I usually try and get to that 150 to 160 range, and I have a protein bar in my oatmeal or a protein in my oatmeal, and that usually helps get me to where I want to go. Any thoughts on that, April?
I think it's very helpful to supplement in the beginning. I think as her body adjusts to the increased intake, I think she will find her hunger will increase, and it will be a lot easier to get the protein in. If she's coming from paleo and she's tracking up the fats before she can get her carbs and protein up, I would suggest adding in some leaner sources of protein. And also, if you can eat seafood or like seafood, you'll get a big bang for your buck there with not a lot of food, because literally 3 ounces of cooked shrimp is going to give you like 25 grams of protein, and it's really not a lot. So
yeah, I mean, protein is one of those things that you really have to work at, and you really have to plan. And I always hear people saying, I have X amount of fat or I have X amount of protein, and I just think to myself, like, that never happens to me, and part of it is just because of some level of planning and some level of understanding the majority of the time. So Jen is saying, it seems like ETPers are mostly CrossFitters too. I would say that not as much lately. There's definitely a lot of people that are doing a lot more stuff. I mean, certainly, I would say that there's not a lot of eat to perform power lifters, because power lifters eat, right? So we don't have to tell the power lifters to eat to perform. We sort of have to tell the CrossFitters to eat to perform, because they're sort of coming at it from a different angle, right? And so that's something to think about. I'm just starting to work on eat to perform and starting to do CrossFit too. How often should I do CrossFit a week? I would say early on, probably 3 to 4 times a week. One of the biggest mistakes that I made, I talk about it often, is that I started doing like the 3 on 1 off that is recommended by HQ. And, I was 41 at the time, 46 now. And that was a mistake. I wasn't fit enough to handle that beating. And I was always kind of hurt, and I didn't get injured, luckily. But I always, I operated at 60% a lot. And the one thing that I figured out, in my training now, and I get, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know. Did you see the picture that I posted, under my mom and grandmother's, the one of my back? I mean, I can guarantee you 2 years ago, my back did not look like that. When I was on barbell shrug, like for instance, if you look at me on barbell shrug, I look like a completely different dude, and that just comes from a smarter and better approach. And so basically my smarter and better approach now is, I do a good amount of lifts. I try to get in, probably 3 to 5 mile walks a week. I do 2 to 3 days of strength training and bodybuilding, and then 2 to 3 days of WOD. So I still do the 3 on 1 off, right? But I do it much smarter. And so if, I've been kind of, I had a WOD that kind of wore me out, or let's say that I did squats, and then I had a WOD that sort of wore me out, and then you know, the next day I'm going to do some, so let's say that my lower body or my back is feeling a little tweaked, you know, I'm going to go upper body and then maybe have a rest day after that. That's something that I've learned that I didn't know. You know, I was trying to do mobility and all this other type of stuff, and you know, those all have their place, but you know, you'd be better off just healing, you know, and you can heal. That's you know, that's where I think like the whole bis and tris day, and lower body days and stuff like that gets a bad rap. I mean, you know, that existed for years for a reason, because it allowed parts of your body to rest, whereas if you're constantly doing these whole body workouts at high intensity, it'll sort of wear you out. And so let's see, what other type of workouts do you recommend? Well, like I said, bodybuilding, you know, some level of strength training I like every once a week, you know, where you're pushing your central nervous system. But you know, really, you know, hikes, you know, roller skating. I mean, I think often people dancing. I don't think people explore that kind of stuff enough. And even in the case of CrossFit, if you look at their pyramid, the way that it's structured, the whole idea of CrossFit is not to CrossFit all the time. It's actually just play sports and do cool things and use that. And you know, I have to say, like, I don't think most people do that, and I think they would enjoy their CrossFit more. I mean, if you CrossFitted 2-3 days a week, went roller skating 1 day a week and hiking 1 day a week because you enjoy those things, are you going to enjoy your CrossFit more? I would probably argue that you would, you know. So that would be the thing I would say as somebody new to CrossFit. The other thing is, you know, just keep eating. You know, you're going to get the best adaptation that you'll ever get in your life right now. So don't mess it up by, you know, getting too in your head about, you know, eating. I mean, if you feel hungry, you should eat, you know. Any thoughts, April, on that?
I agree. That's the biggest thing I think people screw up with is they start something new like CrossFit and, you know, or even any type of strength training program or anything like that, and they just don't eat enough, and they basically, you know, waste that time, you know, that they could be making, you know, mad progress in the midst of a short period of time, 6 months or so.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't say enough because Pam Sherwell came in and said that Jason Khalipa once told her that the best thing you can do is walk a lot. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that, you know, walking can take a toll on you. I actually, you know, with the list that I've been kind of trying to get in, my heels started to really hurt. And, you know, as I looked in my closet and I didn't have anything with a protected heel. And so I ended up buying a running shoe for my walks. And man, it's made all the difference in the world, you know. And, you know, that's just one of those little things. You know, my lower back was kind of, you know, feeling a little yucky. And then, you know, my heel was feeling a little yucky. Man, you know, 3 days in these shoes and all that's gone. So, you know, I get it. We're all supposed to wear minimalist shoes and stuff like this. But you know what? Those padded heels work for a reason. Now that's not to say that I don't you know, use minimalist shoes the majority of the time, especially when I'm working out. But you know, certainly I'm finding that I'm a heel striker when running, and so, you know, I'm going to wear running shoes from now on because it makes me feel better, and it's not so much wear and tear on my body. So I wanted to talk a little bit. I mean, is there anything that that we're missing before I kind of move on to some personal stuff that?
No, I was just going to say something interesting. The one question about, is it just for CrossFitters? I have personally seen so much variety of different things that people do. And it's like, I'm currently coaching a lady who, she's a dragon boat racer. You know, like how freaking cool is that?
Right.
Like the big giant boat where you're like rowing on one side, just all different, like paddleboard. People do these things as a sport, not just recreation. And, it's just Eat to Perform is, it's not just CrossFitters, it's everybody, everybody from stay-at-home moms who do yoga to dragon boat racers to, martial artists and, ballet dancers, all kinds of stuff. So, I think it's kind of cool seeing all the different varieties.
It is cool. I actually just had a discussion with, like a potential investor, and was talking about that exact thing, that, you look at something like CrossFit as an example, and really you're kind of looking for the right type of person. Not everybody's going to be into that. Everyone could do Eat to Perform. It's not for extreme athletics necessarily. Certainly extreme athletes are going to be more interested in it. But I think the average person who would like to move a little bit more and do cool stuff would benefit from knowing what we teach. And so that's going to be interesting. Jen's saying, coming from a background of paleo, she's a little concerned about junk food binges and battling the sugar monster, and how do you add in carbs without craving sugar. I actually think it's adding in the carbs that stop you from craving sugar. And what happens when you have the mindset of I can't have this, the minute you open the door is just wide open. Now, there are some things that you can do from a behavioral standpoint that would make some sense. First of all, I don't know that starchy carbs are going to necessarily have the response that you're talking about. In fact, I think starchy carbs would probably be some of the things that would provide some of that satiety April was talking about earlier, where your hunger signaling is affected positively. But if you wanted to start introducing some kind of, sugary snacks or something like that, where, like a coconut milk smoothie, or even something like Rice Krispie treats that always seem to show up in the Science Lab social, the key to doing that is at 8 o'clock at night. You have it, you'll feel full, and you'll go to bed, and you'll wake up in the morning and no problem. If you started off at 10 a.m. in the morning, maybe you've opened the door, and if you're not used to it, it might be tough to shut. So that would be one behavioral thing that I would look at doing as you start introducing those things, because I think you're probably right to be a little concerned. I think that when, every now and again we have somebody that comes up in the forum and they're like, oh my God, all these sugaries, it just bothers me so much. I can tell you personally, I have a 5-pound bag of gummy bears in my house, okay? The most gummy bears I've ever had is like 15, I mean, when you have this stuff available to you and, you have a healthy relationship with food, it doesn't play one thing on you. And no, I don't have 15 gummy bears 18 times a day. I probably only have, those, I'd say twice a week, at the most,
It's actually, it's the same analogy that I use a lot, how I used to overly restrict myself from chocolate, and, basically, it was bad. I would overeat it, things like that. And eventually, 6-8 weeks, I would eat all the chocolate, or I would eat half a bag and then convince myself, today's already bad. I'm just going to eat it all and make today bad rather than today and tomorrow. Where that's just it's just an unhealthy mindset to have. Whereas I posted in the Science Lab social, I've eaten chocolate every single day for 3 years. I have not had one single day where I've overeaten it. I have not had one single day where I've craved it, because I'm going to eat it. I eat a small square dark chocolate. That's it,
Same here, and it ain't a small square either. I eat dark chocolate macadamia nuts fairly often, and so now the one thing I will say, I think Jen is very, very smart to be saying, hey, look, I haven't had those things in a while. I'm a little concerned. You should be concerned. You should be thinking about behavioral type changes that can allow you to have a better relationship with food. So definitely keep that in mind. Getting to that healthy relationship with food is what I really want to achieve. Oh my goodness, April is totally speaking to me. I want to get there. Yeah, I mean, April, I mean, right? We're both that person. I mean, that's what everybody needs to understand is that we're not coming, the one thing that always bothers me is that when people talk to their clients or blog to people as if like they're on this holy mountain of whole foods and then they're kind of putting out the message to the masses. We're you guys, we were there. I mean, we had bad relationships with food, sometimes overeating, sometimes undereating, and we were able to kind of develop that healthier relationship. And when we used to have a thread that was what do you like about Eat Reform? And probably of 150, 100 of them was it changed my relationship with food. And that's something I think both April and I are really proud about. Let's see. Pam Sherwell saying, well, obviously chocolate makes you sexy. So Pam is like the Eat to Perform humorist, comedian, whatever. So it's going to be interesting. I'm hearing rumors that she might be coming to the Granite Games, so that should be fun. You're coming again this year, right, April?
Yes, I'm coming. I'm trying to get a big corral there. I'm trying to get everybody.
This year, I think we're going to have a good shot at getting a lot of people. I think the one scary thing is that people are going to realize, holy shit, Paul is really bad at CrossFit. Until I just hope to goodness that they have like a deadlift ladder, because that will be the thing. Well, and then anything body weight wise, I'm usually pretty good at that. So we'll end the class. I'm talking a little bit about. Well, many of you guys don't know this, or there's been, I guess, some discussion of it, but I've been cutting for the last, I'd say, 6 to 7 weeks. Part of it was just getting ready for the summer, but also trying to get back down to the 165-pound weight class. And right now I'm 167 pounds. And so I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about what that experience is like, because we started the Wave Method group with a group of about 13 people, and we were just sort of testing things early on, and then we're going to be kind of expanding upon that, and as a staff we're kind of talking about the best ways to do that. But what I wanted to talk about was that this time has been the easiest of all the times I've ever cut ever. And some of the things that I've been able to do and some of the things that I've been able to figure out. One of the things that I think that, I've been able to express to people is the idea that you have to have at least one day where you eat more than you normally would. And so this is a little different than regular Eat to Perform macros, because with regular Eat to Perform macros, you're going to be eating. And but when you're cutting, the whole idea of just down, down, down doesn't work. And then you go, well, Paul, isn't that a cheat meal? I don't like the word cheat meal because of the same thing we talk about with relationship with food. And I think you should count it, because as an example, one of the recommendations that I've had for a lot of those guys has been to actually go 500 over where their total daily energy expenditures should be. So if their total daily energy expenditure is 2,300 on that one given day, they should be at 2,800. The problem is that you go into a cheat meal day and you just go ape shit and you don't log it, and you've eaten 4,500 to 5,000 calories, and then it gets frustrating because you're kind of in this, mode where you're satisfied for that one day, and then you're sacrificing for the rest of the time. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That's the other thing. When I talk about the wave method, a lot of people look at, okay, he's given us 3 numbers, what's that lowest number? Oh, let me do that. If I can do that low number a lot, then that's going to be super helpful. That's actually not the idea with the wave method. The idea with the wave method is to be at that high number as much as possible, and then potentially that middle number, with that low number being the number you want to stay away from as long as possible, right? And so if you can see results, and what I found is that, from myself, I see Pam's Pam talking. I'll respond to what she's saying in a second. But what I found for myself was whenever I went down to a low number, and I found this out actually the previous time that I cut, that if I went to that low number, that I didn't quite see the result that I would want to see. Now, here's the interesting thing about control days. Okay, this is just regular ETP form, wave method, whatever. A lot of times on your control days, your body fat will be up, and that will be a bad signal. And you'll think to yourself, I should do less control days. That's actually not the case. Control days sets you up to be more insulin sensitive, so then you use insulin better on the days that you're working out, and so it loads better, and then ultimately your body fat benefits from that. So that's why I was saying earlier, when I did CrossFit workout, full body, 22 minutes, had a lot of carbs that day, kept my fats real low, lowest body fat percentage in months, right? And so so that's something to think about. In that same respect, okay, the rest days, I'm going to almost always see my body fat be up, my weight lower, okay, almost always. On lifting days, like heavy strength days, in general, could go either way, but tends to be, my body fat tends to be a little bit higher. And then on my CrossFit days, then things are much better. My weight might be up because I'm having more carbohydrates, but once again, those lower days have sort of set up better insulin sensitivity, and therefore my body fat ends up being a little bit better. So you go, well, wait a second, you seem to be saying that on your CrossFit days, your body fat is the lowest. And I am saying that, but there's one caveat. When I do multiple CrossFit days, it's not necessarily beneficial. So, and once again, I'm talking about tracking this using body fat measurements, using the body fat measure that's in my house, not just like a $7,000 machine. So the idea that, well, if something's good, then more of it would be better, that proves that more CrossFit was not better for me. That a varied response that allowed me to recover, that allowed for more lifts and things of that nature, that's better. Any questions or thoughts to what I'm saying, April? Because I want to make sure that I'm clear to everybody. But as I'm kind of laying this out, are there any things that you're thinking of?
No, I understand completely what you're saying. It's funny, you were talking about how your weight is down on control days and then up. I've noticed with a lot of females, I'm actually the same, where my weight is always up after a low calorie day, because my body naturally, as a stress response, it holds on to water. And on a really, really high carb day, I will be like ripped and lean.
My wife my wife is the exact same. My wife is doing the same cut with me. I mean, it's like shockingly amazing. Um, when I have a good response, she has a bad response. And when I have a bad response, she has a good response. After date night, I mean, pretty much like every single date night, my weight is up and she's at the lowest that she'll be for that week. I
I
mean,
think it just kind of goes to play that females are generally more prone to stress than males are, because I see it a lot.
here's what I think it is. And you know, this is somewhat anecdotal. Obviously, we're dealing with lots of clients, so we get to have you know, some thought process on it. And Pam saying amen, sister, and I'm going to agree with you, April, but I'm going to bring a different angle to it. When you look at myself, okay, I'm not a huge guy, right? But I do have a fair amount of muscle mass for my size, and I have more muscle than most females, right? So when a female is having a control day, there, you know, my control days are going to be, you know, 2000s, you know, 2200, you know, normally, not talking in a cutting scenario, but even in a cutting scenario, I tend to try not to go under 2000. A lot of females on control days, right, they'll be like 1700, maybe 1500, depending on their size. 1500 is probably pretty low, but let's say 1700. Well, that accounts for 300 calories more stress, right? So the potential for stress, just based on the size of the individual and the amount of muscle that they have, creates the issue. And that's why we say, like, for women, you know, kind of like, you know, the math doesn't always work out well, and so they tend to be more prone to overtraining and things of that nature. And so yeah, I agree with you, and I wanted to just provide a little bit more insight into why I think that is. Pam was asking, do you think it's easier because you know what already works for you? Yes, 100%. My wife, last time we were cutting, she probably didn't lose a pound for 6 weeks. And, you know, we tried 6, 7 things, and all of a sudden we just like flipped the switch and she was able to lose, you know, 5 to 6 pounds. She was looking to lose, you know, 10 pounds. And she's like, well, let me keep going. I was like, nope, you've been going too long. We got to stop. And we did for 2, 3 months. And then we started up again. Well, guess what happened when she started up again? She already knew what worked. You know, knowing what works is part of the battle. And I'll talk a little bit specifically to Pam in just a second. Someone's still trying to figure out what their metabolism respond to. Honestly, Pam, I you know, we've tried to peel things back with Pam, and I think we've come up with a lot of really good answers so far, but nothing that's really kind of shown great results yet. But I think that the big thing is overtraining for Pam, and just someone that, you know, has been working out for a long period of time. You know, she's got a gymnastics background, things of this nature. When I look back at Pam's food log, like 2, 3 months, and started looking at, you know, her level of activity with her Fitbit and stuff like that, I really didn't see a whole lot of days where she overate. I saw days where her calories were higher, but then when her calories were higher, her activity was higher too. And so we never kind of got to that point where, like, you know, it was just always work, 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 work. When there was more food, she could do more work. That was awesome. But she would never get to a point where she allowed her body to recover. My suspicion is that if we were to, you know, have something like an Omega Wave or iThlete or something of that nature, we would have a better understanding. The problem with HRV testing, it's really expensive, and you're like basically find out kind of what you already know. I mean, I think like Pam, I think you could probably agree that we already kind of have a good idea that you're overtraining, and that we need to kind of play with that variable a little bit. So you buy a $300 thing and you're like, yes. Pam's like, who, me? I mean, honestly, I think that for Pam, we've already peeled back a lot of the onion, and we're basically at overtraining, and if she's overtraining, what we need to do is sort of reverse out of, any type of dieting at this point, try and get a little bit more of a respectful lifestyle that, is going to match her food intake with her energy output. And then we look at fat loss down the line. But, it's a tricky one when you have somebody that, is used to pushing it and has that mentality of pushing it. She's certainly not the first person that we've talked to like this. But they mentally can go places that other people aren't willing to go. And that's not always a good thing, because it's got to allow for some level of understanding. But I think in general, for Pam, the process, we're starting to figure out a few things, but, patience is really going to be the key. And I do feel like I like to make comparisons to my wife, but my wife's not like you, Pam. I mean, my wife is not willing to put in the work that you're willing to put in, and so, we certainly have seen lots of clients like you. And at some point, I think we have to start to realize that, hey, this is a longer process for me. There's just some people that the process is just going to be longer, and there's just not a lot of people in your shoes. Not a lot of people are willing to just drill in those workouts and without respect for the way that they feel, or how little they're eating, or things of that nature. Let's see, Kim's saying there are some of us, myself included, that just need more patience as our journey will be long. I think so. I do. I mean, one of the things that Maggie asked me about recently was, what about the wave method compared to eat to perform? Like, could you get there, eat to perform, as opposed to the wave method? And I'm like, absolutely. What April's doing, giving macros, kind of coaching people, it's going to be, people are going to address a lot of big deficiencies, and they'll see big gains. And a lot of times, they'll get to where they want to go, just right there, figure that out. Okay. And then there's other people that it's a little bit longer. But if you take that long, slow approach, it'll just take you a little bit longer. So the wave method is essentially something that we're trying to help people that feel, a little bit more urgency. But certainly if mentally you can get there where you can be comfortable with a more patient approach, there's no question in my mind that matching your energy output with your energy input will show benefits over time. And I think Pam would be a good example of that.
I was actually going to bring up in regard, because you were talking about Pam's scenario. I had coached a lady who had been doing Eat Perform for a while, been properly fed, but she had a high volume of, output as well. Kane basically said she was ready to cut body fat. We discussed in regards to her reducing some of her training down to 4 days a week compared to 6 days a week. She agreed, basically reduced her calories down to a cut. A month, she lost a half a pound. Looked at her stuff. I actually ended up increasing her food, and she started seeing significant progress. Went from 224 to 206, and then all of a sudden, out the blue, the scale started teetering back up. And of course, I'm frantic, and this what I'm saying is actually directed towards Pam. But I'm frantic thinking, what the hell, it's working like magic. She was actually getting bod pods, everything. It was all straight fat. I think she gained a half a pound of muscle. And come to find out, I had a telephone call with her. I'm like, tell me, are you having marital problems? Do you have a stressful job? What's going on? And come to find out, the one small thing that she failed to mention was a month prior, she had decided to add back in more training without telling me. As soon as she did that, she started gaining weight immediately. So,
See, but there's another element in the case of Pam. Okay, so we were trying to peel back layers, and one of the layers that we peeled back was to have her WOD less, and so she started doing more lifts, and there were some favorable moments there, but she wasn't, really kind of testing the top end. And I get that's kind of fearful because you're maybe losing weight or you're seeing some little bit of results, and but it's really kind of that upward that goes. But the problem is that when you add lists, it still does wear on you. It still is, something, right? And so what I think I think the scenario you described is exactly the type of scenario that might benefit Pam. The problem is you got to be patient with it, and I feel like everything in Pam's situation is set up right. I mean, I wish she would talk to herself better, but in terms of her husband, her family situation, everyone is so super supportive, and obviously she's had us as a way of relying on, and I feel like we'll figure this out. But I think what you described is magic for people, and what you also described is adding more food, getting that if we say, well, why don't you try adding a little bit more lifts and working out less, and then all of a sudden you become like this step monster. It's like, well, that that's not really the goal either. I really genuinely want people to understand that when I enjoy my walks, I enjoy getting out, I enjoy going see the swans at the local lake. It provides me way more than just walking or calories burned. The article that the other day where the woman was talking about, the Fitbit didn't do anything for me. I think the Fitbit with an expectation probably didn't do anything for her. But in terms of if she was doing Eat to Perform and she was eating an adequate amount of food, what she would have found is that she could have ate a lot more than she was doing, but she was trying to look for a specific response, and that's where the problem sort of comes in. And some people's problems are a little bit more complicated, and I think that Pam's situation, the situation that you were describing, those are all things that we can figure out. And in the end, though, I feel like what Gina said the other day was really good. Like, how would if you knew that you could not gain a pound or lose a pound for the rest of your life, how would that affect your journey? And I think that is so powerful because it allows you to think about, okay, I'm going to go to the mirror, I'm going to get buck naked, and I'm just getting cool with that person. And once you've made that decision, all of a sudden things start to become a little bit easier. You're not in the gym all the time. I mean, I think, the one thing I know about Pam is that she just really genuinely enjoys working out. And I feel like, if you really enjoy working out, then you should be working out, and you should, have that in place, but you got to match food with it. If you're not going to match food with it, you're just going to get that stress response, and that's where things are going to be difficult. But I think she has been open to cutting things back and trying some different things, and so as we start to up food, hopefully we see a decent response. But I would say a decent response for Pam is not necessarily weight loss. I would say that a decent response for Pam is just some stability with a lot of energy and just like feeling good about the approach. That's what I would really hope for. Lorenzo saying, I have a couple questions concerning timing and adequate carb intake. I did also skip over a question from Steve. So Lorenzo, if you want to go ahead and do that or follow up with your question, that'd be good. Steve was saying, I'm confused about ketogenic diets for athletes versus carb use. What are your thoughts? Well, my thoughts are ketogenic diets tend to not be very favorable for athletes. You always get these one-offs where people will say, oh gosh, I run marathons with, relying mostly on fats and it's been great. Okay, that's awesome. The good majority of people don't do it that way. And, you contrast that against the norm. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done. Certainly long endurance, you're not going to be, highly, demanding on a glycolytic cycle. So there are instances you could do it. Is it optimal? I mean, it's just, it's just not optimal, and everyone asking this question doesn't tend to be running, the Boston Marathon trying to win. They tend to be someone that's trying to lose a lot of weight, and, once again, ketogenic diets are very known for stress response. And even, the biggest proponents of ketogenic diets, will talk about, hey, short periods of time, very limited use, you're going to feel like crap. And, oh, by the way, it's not necessary. Like, that's the key part, But the problem with a ketogenic diet and the attraction to a ketogenic diet is that you'll lose a lot of water out of your body really quickly. And so you'll lose 20 pounds, really quickly. And people are like, oh, great, I'm down 20 pounds. It's like, well, and then also they have sagging skin, they basically just pulled water out of their body too quickly. And I've seen it in body fat tests with people who've done it really too quickly. And then they end up with more fat than, they wanted on their body. And that ended up being kind of a negative. Lorenzo is saying, I usually do morning lunch cardio session, consisting of swimming, biking, running. Then I do my CrossFit workout in the evening. Okay, so that's a lot of work. Let's see. Okay, the question was timing related. I would say that for the morning stuff, I would probably not have too big of a meal. Sort of depends on your tolerance for food. I would have some carbohydrates there. Usually in a session like that, I would probably have yogurt, honey, some granola, right? So complex carbs. Then post-workout, I would probably, still opt for real food, but if, that gets difficult, definitely you'd want to have like a 2-to-1 protein to carb ratio. That might actually get you most of the way going into your CrossFit workout. So you don't really need a whole lot of carbohydrates, but that would be something that would sort of feel out. And then, just have some carb. I mean, honestly, for you, you're going to have a lot of carbs. That's the long story short. For you to feel right and get the response, say, usually eat majority of my carbs in the evening, sweet potato, rice, or some sort of protein. I think that you should be eating more carbohydrates around your long cardio as well, because even though they're not highly glycolytic activities, they do wear down a lot of glucose. How many carbs are we talking about? I have no idea how many carbs we're talking about. I don't even know who you are. But that's what the forum's for. And so if you could get together with a coach, they can give you a very real idea on that type of stuff. But this format doesn't lend itself real well to kind of running through your carbs and stuff like that. But the coaching forum will do that for you. But it's going to be a lot, I mean, how much do you weigh? And how many carbs are you eating now? That would be another good question. Because when you say sweet potato or rice, I mean, that's like 40 grams of carbs. That's like nothing. 5'9", weighed about 190. Yeah, I mean, probably 350 carbs. You know, I'd say, you know, almost 175 around your cardio workout. So probably 50 to 75. Um, once again, I mean, I'm just estimating, so, a coach will be able to give you more specifics. I'd say probably 50 to 75 in that yogurty type of meal. And then, post-workout, probably, closer to 100 grams of carbohydrates, and then the rest of your carbs in the evening. So maybe 50 grams before your CrossFit, and then post-workout, have the rest of your carbs. Saying he has about 125 to 175 daily, depending on activity. So that's about half of on the high end of what you do is about half of what I think you should probably be doing on a daily basis. So
the high end that he does is probably closer to where he needs to be on the days that he does nothing.
You're right, exactly. And even on the days he does nothing, actually, I think that he should probably be around 225 to 250. And the reason why I say that is because if you're doing 2 days, I mean, almost no control days. I mean, I'm assuming that you work out 5 days a week at least. Is that correct? Just yes or no would be yes. So yeah, no control days. I mean, you just go a little bit lower on carbs, on that day. Now you want to move slowly to that. You don't want to go from 125 to 350, but you'll be able to adjust pretty quickly, dude. I mean, the with your level of athleticism, your body's going to respond to it well. What I would start off doing though is kind of keep it mostly to post workout in the beginning. Maybe move from 175 to 225, and then 225 to 250, and then kind of get there that way. Say 5 to 6 days, usually a long run bike on weekends. That would be the day that I would, have pizza or hamburger and French fries or something like that. Just something that and you go, well, why that choice? That's a bad food. Maybe that's a thought that you have. I'm gonna tell you why that choice, because there's just no way to get there with chicken and kale. I mean, you have to have some energy dense sources on the days that you're doing big work. And so for somebody who doesn't have the caloric requirements that you need, that wouldn't be the suggestion. So Sherry's saying, I seem to always be high on sodium, especially when I try to reach my protein without protein shakes. Should I be concerned about this? Sort of depends on how active you are. If you are, doing a lot of CrossFit, sweating a lot, things of that nature, long endurance, sweating a lot, it's probably not that big of a deal. I would kind of keep it in check though. Usually when somebody says they struggle with sodium, can you give me an example of what you mean struggling with sodium? Are you talking about 7,000 milligrams a day, or are you talking about 2,000? Sherry? Usually it is over around 3,000. I would try to keep it, in that 2,000 to 2,500 range. The other thing that I think normally happens with people that are, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be concerned. For myself, 3,000 would not be a concern. But if it is a concern for you, I would really look at convenience foods. Are you having a lot of Chipotle? Are you having a lot of beef jerky? Things like that. And those are the things that are the big contributors. Usually when you look at your food log, you're like, oh, Jimmy Dean sausage, there you go, 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So, you know, usually it's one or two things, and if you can sort of find the alternatives to those one or two things, that's where the secret is. Well, we had, you know, up to 40 people here at actually almost 60 people here at any one given point. So we're going to shut it down right there. We're actually 15 minutes longer than we normally would go. So appreciate everybody being here, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye now.
Good night, everybody.
All right.